welcome to Tales to Tell. We are glad you are with us. This is a special series produced by the Scan TV class. We are going to be sharing glimpses into our personal lives. Our first glimpse will be experiences of Vince Bagarozza's father in Saipan during World War II. This is Vince Bagarozza. I'm Barry Agen, and I'll be questioning him about his father's experiences in World War II. Vince, how did your father first become involved in the military?
He first became involved in 1939. He joined the National Guard. He was working in the post office and attending Brooklyn College. And the recruiters were in the area. And he thought, well, this would be a great opportunity.
And this was before we went to the war?
1939.
Right.
But there were issues back then. Even though the U.S. was isolationist, we were preparing to at least train the soldiers. So he thought he was going to just have to do one weekend a month. Mm-hmm. That turned into, as we'll get on, you'll see what he got himself into.
Right.
But he joined in 1939. Most of the maneuvers that they did and work they did were in New York, because they were basically the New York National Guard. So most of the maneuvers were in New York. However, what was going on in Europe with the Nazis and what was going on in the Pacific with the Japanese overtaking colonies of the French, the Dutch, and the British, they started to activate them. So in 1940, they were activated, moved the New York National Guard, which was the 27th Infantry Division, moved them down to Arkansas, then Louisiana, and then to Fort McClellan in Alabama. Mm-hmm. Alabama was an interesting experience because since they were the New York National Guard, many of the residents in the town near the fort were not welcoming.
Now, how old were you when he first started telling you these stories?
I was fairly old. He didn't open up, as a lot of my uncles didn't, until later on. Mm-hmm. So I must have been in my 30s when
really?
We'd go for walks, and he would tell me, tales of what transpired. And there are also volumes written about the Battle of Saipan, which is what he eventually got involved with. And there's a museum in upstate New York, Troy, New York, where the New York National Guard, the 27th Infantry Division, was headquartered. So
you, in your early youth, you really had no idea what he had experienced?
I had no idea in my 20s.
That's amazing.
I had no idea. Until one day he asked me to watch a movie From Hell to Eternity with Jeffrey Hunter. Mm-hmm. But it was from the Marines side viewpoint, that movie. Mm-hmm. Later I learned about how the Army was involved in the Battle of Saipan, which was very significant.
Right. Was your mother aware of what he had gone through? Did he open up to her?
He opened up to her, yeah. He opened up to her when they first met.
Right.
They met after he went through this.
And then at some point you began questioning him and getting into more
detail?
Because
I discovered one day, I was searching through a few things that he had, and I saw the Purple Heart. So I questioned him on the Purple Heart.
Oh, he didn't have that prominently displayed for everybody to see?
No, he didn't. No.
That's interesting.
He originally, my grandmother had it, and then she gave it to us. Mm-hmm. So what happened is the attack on Pearl Harbor prompted the 27th Infantry Division to be sent to Fort Ord, California, where they went through further training. Then with the attack on Pearl Harbor, they activated them, and they sent them to Oahu, to Honolulu.
Right.
And he was billeted at originally Schofield Barracks, and then their job was to protect the outer islands. So for about 2 years, from 1942 to 1944, until they went to Saipan, he was in Hawaii, basically just protecting the outer islands.
So was he there before or after the attack on Pearl Harbor?
After the attack on Pearl Harbor, yeah. There was an Army division there before, but that was not them. The 27th Infantry goes back to the Revolutionary War and includes the Fighting 69th, which from World War I for history, which was basically an Irish regiment.
Right.
They eventually became the 169th. So he was actually was trained as a combat engineer.
Mm-hmm.
So what happened is, finally, the U.S. won the Battle of Midway and a few other battles, Guadalcanal, and then they wanted to continue the fighting. So what happened was, in 1944, in March of 1944, they came up with the Battle of Forager, Operation Forager, which was the attack of the Mariana Islands, of which Saipan is one of them. This was the first time that there was any kind of confrontation on a Japanese territory, actual Japanese territory.
Mm-hmm.
So, but this was a joint operation between the United States Marines and the U.S. Army.
And his involvement at this point was
basically a combat engineer. You know, they were going to overtake the airfield. The airfield was very strategic in that it would be a good launching point for the bombers to eventually go further into Japanese territories and eventually to Japan.
And where was he stationed next?
He was stationed in Saipan.
Oh, and that was his permanent position?
Yeah,
there?
and then his actual, there were a couple of big battles. When they first got on the island, there weren't many confrontations. Then it started to heat up. By July, it really heated up. They were basically overtaking the Japanese soldiers at that point.
Right.
There were about 5,000 left. They decided that the end was near, the Japanese did, the end was near. They were going to do a bonsai attack where all hell breaks loose. They just take whatever they can. They were running out of ammunition. They put knives on sticks to create spears. They used rakes from the laborers, and they basically attacked. 5,000 attacked and overran the group that he was attached to, which was the 105th. The 105th got the brunt of it.
The Americans suffered significant losses at that point?
During the battle, they did.
Mm-hmm.
They were overran. And it created actually 3 Medal of Honor winners during that battle. Lieutenant Colonel O'Brien, who was the head of the 105th Regiment, basically in order to protect his men, overtook a 50 caliber machine gun. And when they found him the next day, on July 7th, the next day he was hunched over the machine gun. And there were about 100 soldiers, Japanese soldiers, in front of him.
So he actually protected the rest of the regiment?
He protected as much as he could.
Right.
But they eventually overran.
Mm-hmm.
They got to the hospital, the Army hospital, and that's where a Captain Benjamin Solomon, who was a surgeon, in order to protect the Japanese from getting into the Army hospital, which was basically a large glorified tent, he took over a machine gun in front of there. And they found him the next day, hunched over with quite a number of Japanese in front of him.
And your father survived? He never suffered any injuries?
He suffered injuries later on.
We'll be taking a short break and then we'll be back with further information.
If the black dog of depression makes you feel like the saddest soul on earth, you're not alone. Around 350 million people share this debilitating but treatable condition. If you're worried about someone, ask if they're okay. If you're not doing so well yourself, ask for help. There is no shame in doing so. The only shame is missing out on life. So get help, be helped, and always hold on to hope.
Hi, I'm Vince Bagarozza. Welcome back to Tales to Tell. Now it's my turn to interview Barry Agen, who will really have a tale to tell regarding his triplets. Welcome, Barry.
Thank you, Vince.
Barry, tell us about what it was like when you first found out that you were having triplets.
We found out fairly early. My wife had gone through some procedures, and she was getting toward the danger zone as far as pregnancies, And there were originally 2, and then by surprise, the third one showed up on a sonogram, and I was ready to pack my bags and leave town. But I accepted the fact and looked forward to it, and we didn't know the gender until they were actually born. And I had 3 girls who were not identical, fortunately. And my wife was home with them. They were in intensive care for several months. My wife was home with them for the first couple of months, and then I took a year's leave from work. And basically, I was home pretty much alone with them, other than a few volunteers that came in occasionally and helped me out.
So you did get help from family and friends?
Believe it or not, it was just two neighbors in the development, two professional grandmothers, and they would come in at feeding time and help me out. But other than that, I was home alone with them.
You were home alone for how long?
Till I went back to work the following year. And it was I would have gone back sooner, but it was very difficult to find any help that was affordable. So basically, I had to stay home and take care of them.
And how when you told family and friends, how did you do that? How did you?
I think they knew almost immediately, because my wife was in the hospital for a month before she gave birth.
Oh, okay.
And they questioned it, and basically we had to tell them that there was going to be multiples. And it's a very scary time, because especially my wife was not young at the time, and there were always the possibility that there could have been problems. But fortunately, everything turned out all right. They had, because they were 9 weeks premature, they had to stay in intensive care for like almost 2 months. But when they came home, they were fine.
So what was your day like in that first year?
It was very hectic. I mean, as a 40-year-old who had never had children before, the fact that I think I mentioned to you before, I had OCD, and I had charts for everything.
Wow.
Every feeding, every diaper change, because I needed to know specifically who did what when. And my wife would come home after work, and she'd check the charts, and I would get in the car and take off.
And just
I went to Toys R Us and filled up with diapers and formula. And
you had to get 3 of everything.
I had to get 3 of everything. And I also needed to get some fresh air and get out of the house, because when they were very young, I couldn't really take them out. Once they became older, it wasn't so bad. We had a triplet stroller. I could go to the mall. People would gawk and ask, silly questions.
So as they got older and they got involved in activities, you were really spread thin.
My job as a school bus driver allowed me to be available to them, because I had the same schedule that they did. So I was home with them summers, and I got involved. I was one of the girls when it came to being involved with them with Girl Scouts and Hebrew school and gymnastics and swimming and all the other after-school activities.
You put a lot of mileage on the car.
Absolutely. Yeah. But it was very interesting. One of the problems was, when people would carpool and whatever, no one would take my 3 in exchange for my taking their 1. So basically, I was always their full-time chauffeur.
You were the full-time.
Yeah.
And what are they doing now? And how old are they now?
They're 35 years old. My baby, who's a minute younger than the other 2, lives in Florida. She has an 18-month-old child, my only grandchild. The other 2 share an apartment in New Jersey. And, career-wise, they all graduated college. They never followed the path that they started, their education with. And they're doing fine. They're all okay. Hopefully, they'll produce some more grandchildren for me, closer to home, because the one in Florida I only see about twice a year now.
They may have triplets. It runs in the family.
Unlikely. That's not likely. And I wouldn't wish that on them anyway. There are easier paths to take.
There's easier paths to take, but I'm sure it was rewarding.
And, very much so.
And you did a great job.
They
turned out well.
I did the best I could.
Yeah.
And I hope they appreciate that.
I'm sure they do. Thank you, and we'll be right back.
If the black dog of depression makes you feel like the saddest soul on earth, you're not alone. Around 350 million people share this debilitating but treatable condition. If you're worried about someone, ask if they're okay. If you're not doing so well yourself, ask for help. There is no shame in doing so. The only shame is missing out on life. So get help, be helped, and always hold on to hope.
I'm Carl Lilvik. Welcome to Tales to Tell. These are oral histories from SCAN students. Today I will be interviewing Renee Maxweel about her travels. And I want to say, Renee, I hear you've been to at least 2 or 3 continents.
Carl, how many continents are there?
I don't know. You tell me.
There are 7 continents, and I've been to all of them,
Oh, wow.
including Antarctica, which was a wonderful, wonderful trip.
Wow.
Wonderful trip.
Wow.
We all wore red. We had these big red jackets so that they could see us in the snow. And we were just at the tip of Antarctica. Weren't in the center where the big penguins are. We were just what they call the chin strap penguins. And we were told to leave them alone and let them do their thing. But Carl, I'm not dressed in an Antarctic outfit.
No, I see that. It looks kind of oriental.
Kind of, yes.
Kind of.
Okay. And this is a piece of clothing. It's an antique piece of clothing from China. And I've been to China twice.
Wow.
The first time in 1990, right after Tiananmen Square, and there were not many tourists. And then about 7 or 8 years ago, I made my second trip to China. And it was amazing the differences between then and now. All these huge apartment buildings, all empty, all empty. Yeah. And they have like little villages called hutongs, the old China, these people used to live there. And they are just about destroyed, just about destroyed.
Yeah, they have one tourist attraction. When I was there a few years ago, they had one village left as a tourist attraction.
Yes, I guess I saw the same one.
Yeah, we went in and had a meal with the family. Yes, it was very
good.
nice.
Did you enjoy your trip to China?
Yeah, we sure did. We sure did. I was impressed by all the BMWs driving the highways.
That's
never
correct.
expected that.
And a few Mercedes.
Yes.
And yes, and a lot of scooters.
Oh, yes.
And a lot of scooters.
And bicycles.
Yes, that's true. That's true.
Yes.
And they go down the road like 16 abreast, all pedaling at the same speed. Very interesting. Okay, I went, of course, to Xi'an, where we saw the soldiers. And when I went in 1990, I went there.
What is Xi'an?
Xi'an is a city, Xian, where they have these buried soldiers made of terracotta.
Terracotta, yeah.
And when I went in 1990, there was just a small space in Xi'an. And when I went back, it was huge, huge area. I could not believe it, could not believe it. And of course, we drank tea with a little lid on the teacup. And of course, calligraphy. I did have a pen.
You did have a pen?
Here it is, here it is, here it is, a calligraphy pen. And it's slanted. Now, Carl, I'm left-handed. And it slants the wrong way. So I hope they have a few left-handed Chinese people because the nib goes the other way. So but calligraphy is a wonderful
Well,
thing.
I've gotten the point.
Okay, very good. Now, besides China, I went to, I think, which was one of my favorite trips, Vietnam. The people are absolutely lovely. Lovely, lovely people. The teenage schoolgirls are wearing these white long robes, dresses, and the Vietnamese hold no anger toward us Americans. They said we were just the last in a long line of invaders. They were very nice. And my last trip that I'm going to talk about is to Africa. I've been to Africa twice, once to the mainland of Africa, and then the other to Zanzibar. And,
All right.
And I have these hanging on my wall at my home. So therefore, there's a string in there that was supposed to hold it on the wall. Okay, so this is.
So what was your favorite location?
I think one of my favorite was Vietnam.
Vietnam,
lovely. As I say, lovely people. One of my least favorite was India.
All right.
Very difficult trip. The food did not agree with me. I did not agree with the food. Many people in poverty. And of course, the cows are sacred, you know.
right.
And I know there have been many movies made about India, about
right.
people, I guess, from England retiring there. I don't know if it'd be my first choice.
I don't know if they retired there or they were just left there after the British left, you know, because they had a big control of China,
that's true. Yes,
of India.
Absolutely,
right.
absolutely, yeah. Now, one of my favorite trips was to Antarctica.
Yes.
Have you talked about that?
No.
Okay.
No, we haven't.
Very good.
No, you did. You talked about the red.
Oh,
wearing
yes,
the
the red jacket
all right.
that you could find us
You
in
know
the
what?
snow.
Let me just ask you one question.
Surely.
Is it important with all this travel? Do you have trip insurance or anything like
Oh,
that?
absolutely.
You do?
Absolutely.
Wow.
If you get sick
Yeah.
overseas, and I remember one woman on the trip to Africa, I forget what happened, but she had to be airlifted home.
Wow.
Now, if you don't have trip insurance, the cost is astronomical.
Yeah,
So I would certainly say to anyone, and it's worth it, no matter how much it is. And it really is not that expensive,
Right.
but I would certainly urge you to take trip insurance
Okay.
in case of something unforeseen.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
that's great.
Yeah.
And that wraps it up.
I'd
you know,
certainly- oh,
you
went so
with your
quickly.
trip
Yeah.
and trip insurance.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Renee.
I loved it.
Very interesting travels.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Well, thank you very much for joining us. We'll be right back.
If the black dog of depression makes you feel like the saddest soul on earth, you're not alone. Around 350 million people share this debilitating but treatable condition. If you're worried about someone, ask if they're okay. If you're not doing so well yourself, ask for help. There is no shame in doing so. The only shame is missing out on life. So get help, be helped, and always hold on to hope.
Welcome back to Tales to Tell. Joining us now is Carl Lilvik to tell us about his life in the United States military. Carl, tell us about your life in the United States military.
Well, thanks a lot.
When did it start?
I've got 7 minutes to put 21 years into
Okay,
it. All
well,
right.
first of all, you went to the Citadel.
That's correct.
Okay.
The Citadel, the military college of South Carolina. I graduated in 1961, wound up in the Army as a Signal Corps officer. And my favorite little story is towards the end of your senior year, when you're going to get commissioned into the Army, they tell you what your branch is. You don't have a lot of choices, but they tell you. I was a business major, and I was told I was Signal Corps. I went into the captain we had in the office there, who was Signal Corps. I said, Captain Comstock, why Signal Corps? I'm a business major. I don't know a sound wave from an ocean wave. And he says, don't worry about it, Mr. Lilvik. He says, don't worry about it. He says, all you got to know is you got a black box. Something goes in this side and comes out the other side. And if it doesn't happen, you know what you do? I said, no, that's my problem. I don't know what I would do. And he says, very simple. You just say, hey, Sergeant, come and fix this. Anyway, you switch over 20-some years later. I was down at Fort Belvoir in the officers club, and I look over there, and here's his full colonel, had his name tag on, Comstock, and I walked up to him and I said, are you Keith L. Comstock? He said, yes. He looked at me. I was in civilian clothes, and I said, well, you don't remember me. I was a cadet at the Citadel. He said, oh, I was there. I said, I know you were there. And I told him the story, what would happen, and I said, unfortunately, you lied. That was, it wasn't that simple. But anyway, that's my favorite little story about being in the Signal Corps. I wound up being more in logistics than technical, and wound up at Fort Monmouth in a project manager office. And the only other couple, you were in Vietnam. I was there long before you.
I'm sure.
And
a
it
more
wasn't as
unpleasant-
friendly. It wasn't as
Absolutely,
friendly as when
yeah.
I was there.
Yeah.
It was, I was a logistician, and I took care of the first cav as far as getting supplies into them. Again, I was there as a signal officer, but I was handling everything. We had I remember in December we used to have movies that we would get, and I was sitting there, and the colonel that was in charge of the battalion sat down next to me, and I was worried about communications equipment. I was
right.
supposed to supply that to the division, make sure they had it. And he said, Captain Lilvik, you think you can handle taking over the whole division? And I said, what do you mean? He says, well, I want to make you the assistant division supply officer. That means you'd have to be in charge of Class 1, which is food, Class 2, which is clothing, Class 3, which is ammunition, Class 4, which is barbed wire and construction material, and Class 5, which was ammunition. You'd be in charge of all of that. And I said, well, what are you going to say? Yeah, sure. Yes, sir. I can handle that. I knew nothing about ammunition. I knew nothing about fuel. But anyway, I took it over. 3 days later, I get a call from the ranking Signal Corps officer in the division who made assignments, career development. I was in logistics. They said I had to get technical. I had to get out and do something with the combat people to learn how to really handle communications. Well, that was like 3 days after I started this new job, and I told him, I said, well, you have to call my colonel because I just got this job. And he said, okay. They called. The colonel said, no way, we're not going to let him go. And I said, all right. So there was a guy by the name of, just lost it.
But I have a title for your book.
You do?
It's called Call My Colonel.
Call My Colonel, yes, yes.
Okay. So.
But the strange part of the situation was they sent a lieutenant from another unit to the unit that I was supposed to go to. He was there about 2 months. He jumped off a helicopter and a grenade blew up, took his legs and an arm off. So that would have been me if I had been there. He eventually, and I wish I could, I swear it was Maxwell. He became Secretary of State to Jimmy Carter in Georgia, then became the head of Veterans Affairs. And,
yes, I do. Yes, I do know that.
Yes, and he's the guy.
He's still living?
No, he just died. He just died last year.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so.
But I remember that.
Yeah.
What a courageous, heroic man he was. Very good.
So
now, tell us a little bit more about your entire career. And you left the Army as what?
A lieutenant colonel.
Lieutenant
colonel.
A light colonel.
A light.
Colonel Light.
Not as heavy as I am now.
Okay.
So basically, I just rattle off my assignments. Reported to Fort Gordon, Georgia, went from there to Fort Monmouth here in New Jersey. From Fort Monmouth, my first assignment was in Korea. Went from Korea to Fort Jackson, from Fort Jackson to Heidelberg, Germany, from Heidelberg, Germany to Livorno, Italy, from Livorno, Italy to Vietnam, from Vietnam to back to Fort Monmouth for school. From here, I went to Northeastern University. I taught there for 3.5 years. From Northeastern, wound up going to Hawaii for 3 years. And
we both ended up at Seabrook.
Seabrook. She's my neighbor.
Thank you again for joining us, and we hope you enjoy this presentation. See you next time.